A new brand of Islam has been created
by governments in the West.
A brand of Islam that seeks to stifle the Muslims' concerns for their brothers and sisters around the world.
A brand of Islam that accepts the Western reading of history at the expense of the real Islamic viewpoint.
A reading of history that tells us to embrace as our own
those who travelled halfway across the world to fight us in our lands.
Let me behold you when comes the judgment. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
A brand of Islam where the insignia and symbols of Islam are mocked and abused, all under the guise of free speech.
The Quran, according to me, is a fascist book, so my aim is to attack and to expose the real nature of the Quran.
Is it freedom of speech you're talking about, or freedom of hate speech?
where the Muslims are expected to tolerate the denigration of key beliefs.
And when people are talking about Islam being a religion of peace, this is baloney.
The slander of the Prophet.
The satirization of their values.
And the mocking of our dress code and our practices.
Wearing the burqa is what's divisive. That's the whole point I'm making. That's what's dividing us. I don't want it in our nation.
A brand of Islam whose values are derived not from the Quran and the Sunnah, but from the whims and desires of mankind.
Australian communities, Muslim communities. It's a contradiction in terms, isn't it?
And a moderate, secular version of Islam that sits comfortably within Western designs for the Muslim world.
Get rid of it, tear it out the Quran, and come with a new, more moderate Islam.
So the Muslims are increasingly expected to choose between this westernized Islam
and the Islam that our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ brought to us
1400 years ago as a mercy to all of mankind.
And so Muslims in the West have to question,
Do we and can we integrate?
Or would integration entail compromising some of our key Islamic principles?
Well, joining me now to discuss some of the issues that were raised over the weekend is Uthman Badar, the Australian spokesperson for Hizb Tahrir. Thank you very much for your time. You denounce democracy. You want fundamentalist Islamic law to spread across the globe. Your organisation has a fuzzy position at best on violent resistance. Why shouldn't Australians view you with fear and suspicion?
Well, thanks for having me, Tracy. Well, I think I don't want to probably respond to some of those sound bites. Our positions are very clear in terms of democracy, in terms of what we're doing here in Australia, and that our primary struggle really is in the Muslim world. It's unfortunate that, in spite of the fact that on innumerable occasions we've said that we are not working for an Islamic state in Australia, that this sort of innuendo and fear-mongering is still being peddled.
But you have this conference, you hold this conference in Australia. If your fight is not here, why hold a conference here?
We hold it here because, again, the Australian government is the one that is siding with other Western powers in backing the tyrants and the despots that rule in the Muslim world.
So your fight is in Australia,
or
then?
Egypt or Pakistan.
So you say your fight is in Australia, then?
No, well, our struggle is in the Muslim world, but the Australian government is a party to that. And we can talk about local issues, whether we talk about counter-terrorism or national security. The Australian government funds things like interfaith dialogue and institutes to promote moderate Islam, a secular, apolitical version of Islam. And so, look, I hope the irony is not lost on anyone that it's advocates of liberalism, of freedoms that are saying, let's ban the burqa, let's ban this, let's ban that. If you don't like our views, why don't you go back to where you come from?
Let's test your views.
These sorts of approaches.
Let me test your views. Do you agree with the view, for example, that, quote, he who does not rule by Islam should either retract or be killed?
Look, as I said, I'm not going to respond to sound bites. Our approach is very clear.
Well, this is a quote. This is a quote.
Democracy.
But this is a quote, Mr. Badar, that is purportedly in your organisation's literature. It is certainly a quote that has been uttered by some of the extremist clerics who would be front and centre in this Islamic state that you advocate, that he who does not rule by Islam should either retract or be killed. Do you endorse that view?
Look, again, as I said, unless we're going to extol a good portion of our literature, there's no point in taking out phrases like that. I said our approach is very, very clear. Our approach is very, very clear that let's be honest with each other.
Are you afraid to answer that question?
There is a very clear difference between a man-centric worldview and a God-centric one. And when we do talk about democracy, I think, again, we should be honest with each other that it's quite hypocritical on the part of Western governments to have all this talk about democracy while supporting dictatorships and tyranny in the Muslim world. That's where the issue is.
All right, so you're not going to answer that question.